It's Monday, March 1st. Oh, it's March already. And this is the memory team meeting. So going top down, get this floating bar out of my way. Build board. So one closed item from last week, and it's Alexi, Nakiyoshi fork. Sorry, anything you want to cover there, Alexi?
No. Right. I think we mentioned it already, so nothing.
Sounds good. All right, and then Nicola, measuring performance impact for a proposed web engine.
Well, on Friday, I added a lot of new measurements related to the times for GC start and full GC cycle and some additional things and comparison between running Sidekick with the web engine and without, just to compare is there a big difference between running Puma and Sidekick with the web engine and without it. So I think that we have, and Camille agreed, that we have everything that we need for the blueprint to update the blueprint and calculate the potential impact on GitLab.com and other installations. So I think it should be closed, but I left it in review so Camille can take a look and comment if any additional work is needed. But I think that we are done with it.
I think it should be closed after me looking at that. I will just write a comment and close that with a comment. Thanks. But basically my comment gonna link to your measurements that you had and say that we fulfill the goal of measuring the impact of the web engine.
Thanks.
Probably the biggest surprise to me that if we would have this web engine, Sidekey boot up time would shrink from 45 seconds to 20 seconds.
Yes, that's great. I didn't expect that much.
This is something that I noticed. Then we in this web engine having controllers, API, GraphQL, we would be looking at around 30% lower memory footprint on idle. And also I think on running some of the requests. I think it was on running some of the requests.
Yeah, it was.
And we would be looking at about 15% faster GC cycles because of much smaller memory footprint.
That's true.
I think these are the key highlights of that measurements.
But 30% reduced memory usage for Sidekick, isn't Sidekick one of the main components that actually uses memory? So that sounds like a lot.
To be honest, Fabian, this is only part of that story. We didn't investigate it further, but we could the same apply for Puma, not loading all the Sidekey aspects, so loading very small portion. So you in mirror, you could look at having 30% here and 30% on Puma of reduced memory usage. And from what I saw, given amount of the Sidekey that we run on the production, even not optimizing further, just having those, we would be looking at on GitLab.com saving over 500 gigabytes of the memory in total on Sidekey alone.
That sounds exciting. And my internal timeline for realizing this is approximately next week. Am I right?
Stunned silence. So yeah, I had a similar question. So this is the proposal for measurement. When can we actually roll this out, or is there anything stopping us from rolling this out?
It's a multi-step process on re-architecturing, how we build the software a little, and this is related to the composable code base. But I think now just that we have the data, it's very reasonable to say that this is big return of the investment. That is pretty big, but it can be basically a requirement for the long term, our ability of shipping new features to GitLab. to approach our code base in more like composable application layer variant.
And when you say multi-step process, and again, my ignorance here, is this something that will be laid out in this blueprint already, or is that something that we can do sort of once that is more defined and say like this is a potential path forward here in iterations, and depending on how much needs to be fanned out to other teams, then maybe that is something that we can actually think about coordinating with others, right? Because if you have such big gains and you can say, okay, these are the 20 steps that would need to happen, right? And if we do this, we believe we'll save 500 gigabytes of RAM on .com. These are the savings, right? Then maybe we have an opportunity to actually push that through different stages as well. But I guess they would need, sort of a more tangible, this is what's actually required.
So Nicola work presents like the proof of concept of something that is functional and gives you like a very good sense of what needs to be changed. I think like, at least from Matthias, there was like alternative suggestion of the patchwork that we didn't investigate further. But this is something that we would have to like probably look. I think like,
we actually noticed that Puckwork is already deprecated. They put it, they released it 6 months ago, and in the latest blog post, I happened to just like look at the page again, and now it says it's already in maintenance mode. There was no explanation as to why, but just a side note. So.
Okay, I mean, like, in any case, my perception is always that Ruby is a very dynamic language. If we can make something explicit, it's gonna have long-term lasting effects because people will need to figure out where they should be putting their code. And we may just help moving some of that today. But Fabian, I think like we need, in any case, it's gonna need involvement from others because like we can execute that to some extent, but I think the biggest challenge for me of that is like we see the benefits of that. We have a proof of concept that Nicola spent on, I think it was like probably 2 iterations that you spent on.
Yeah.
So it kind of already shows that it's not easy, but like the proof of concept also shows that if you know the steps, it's quite easy to get there because like these changes are fairly straightforward if you order them in the correct
so actually
so I think like now we need to finish blueprint. We need to get development to talk about the blueprint, about the proof of concept, and see what people actually think about that. I'm kind of thinking that we need to push that forward right now because the GraphQL thing is like something that we may be affecting GraphQL. And this was our actually first pick to move GraphQL as something that is completely new element. It's still like kind of disconnected, but this reality gonna be changing in upcoming milestones because GraphQL wants to implement subscription model. And if you would want to change this architecture, we would kind of work with them before they would actually change the GraphQL to the subscription model. And it would imply that it really depends on how they approach the GraphQL subscription model. But one of the approaches is that you push GraphQL payload over Redis to action cable WebSocket connection that is living on another process. So they would require GraphQL to be present in the side key. And it kind of breaks our contract because like our first step was GraphQL, but we can also like reorient on something different. But we see just like that in the bug, the GraphQL. Nicola, how much the difference was on the GraphQL alone? It was, I think, 60 megabytes, right?
Around 60, 70 megabytes. And I think around we load 1,200 files less than on Puma.
So like we would be looking how percentage of that was like 70 megabytes on 700. It was like 10%.
10%, yeah.
It's about like the GraphQL is like 10% of the site we process today.
Yeah, we don't need to come to a solution now, but I think I agree with this, and I think from some recent experiences with the sort of the Geo SelfService framework, people are, I think, generally quite willing to do the right thing if they understand what that requires from them, right? As in, if there are clear steps, right, and there's enough information, right, and we can make it very explicit what doing this thing actually means for them, right? I think they understand the benefit of it. I think there's a good shot that folks would actually be quite open to doing it, right? But the more hand wavy, this is a great idea, but we don't quite know how to do it, and it could take a long time, right? The less likely people are probably to get on board. So I think the more work we can do, sort of based on Nicolas' POC, and the blueprint to make it easy for folks to actually do the right thing, right, for us, the more likely I think it is to push some of those things through. But that's just a general remark.
Yeah.
I think that like my perception is like that we know if we would follow race engine route, we know exactly what to do. We need to figure out like the iteration and steps, but I think Nicola has this very good understanding what needs to be done, in what order, and how it should look like. Because like we actually got GraphQL with the being green using also tests. So like we did go on the GraphQL pretty much to the POC that could likely be merged if you would really aim to for that goal. So
and maybe this is actually an opportunity to write that up into into the handbook as developer documentation and saying, these are the steps exemplified by GraphQL, right? And this is what you would have to do, and you can build on that and make it better over time. It's exciting. Great work, Nicola.
Fabian, if you would write your suggestion in like our doc, because I didn't fully understand it.
Sure. So I said that I think what we can do here is, for example, if we know what the steps are for GraphQL, right? We can document that on a page, right, in the handbook, for example, for developers, and say, this is what we are looking to do, right? This is a way to do it for GraphQL. Here is how you can accomplish the same thing for another component. I'm not sure of the details, but I think what I'm looking for is a way for folks in other teams to know what they need to do, and so that when we work with them and we actually want them to do this, right, they have documentation and a lot of sort of information on how to do it, right, ahead of time, because then they can understand it. I think that may be a suggestion.
Yes, I think it makes sense. I would actually put it in the blueprint as part of the case studies,
yes.
Because it actually, this recipe only works for the case study done by the Nicola.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not familiar with the blueprint like concepts, like the whole thing, like how the process works now when we like give the blueprint to the wider audience. What happens next? Like we should update the blueprint, maybe the details about implementation details and results, and then what?
I think we should also put like estimated effort, how long we expect each item like to be delivered, and like what is our like timeline if we would follow that, because like I think like we need to understand like the complexity versus benefit versus impact over time. And like I think with everything, we don't want to be like spending 1 year on something. We rather want to have something like in 2 or 3 iterations at most, at least for the like preliminary work. So maybe introducing some kind of skeleton framework, but don't move the data yet there. So I think like if we figure out iterations and like steps, then it should come like with the estimates. How long it take us to do it and what is the benefit. Benefit, we know what is the benefit, but like how long it would take us to do it, and basically how many working hours we kind of expect roughly to spend on that.
So what are the immediate next steps? It seems like it should, in a general sense, it's pull all of the knowledge out of Nicola's head and make sure that it's represented in issues and the blueprint. Is that right?
Yes, and then I would say that the next step would be to really announce that to the backend. Also, really start involving the director of the development and VP of engineering to raise this importance.
So are we going to have an implementation, like we keep using the GraphQL implementation as an example? Are we going to have that working example delivered and then build off of that? Or is this more of, this is what we've shown in our proof of concept? Does it work with plans for what folks are using with GraphQL before we do the first implementation?
I would expect that just because the GraphQL would be like prominent example and really like the first one on the list to solve, we would hear from the GraphQL experts on that point, what they think about the proposal and what are the potential downsides or limitations that we would apply on them. And we'll figure out exactly how to solve these limitations.
Do we already know?
Yes.
I was just wondering, do we know of any other potential candidates that we could extract? I remember Grape was being talked about. I'm just wondering, those are the only 2 I know of, because that might also maybe be useful. I'm just, the reason I'm asking is, yeah.
I want to say we ended up with moving GraphQL, Grape API, and controllers, all controllers as well.
Okay, right.
Like there are 3 POCs, one with moving just GraphQL, one moving just Grape API and GraphQL, and the third one with all of them, like the Grape API, the GraphQLs, the serializers, and the GraphQL. So the latest one like reduced memory for 260 megabytes or something. So that's
right.
I'm wondering if it would be more effective to have an implementation example rather than a proposal. So maybe to Matthias' point, maybe we actually implement the Grape
we have
example.
the POC for all 3 of them.
Yeah. So pick one and ship it, and then shape the documentation around that with examples to say, okay, we've done it for this one. Like say we've implemented the Grape changes.
Well, I'm not sure that we can ship it at the moment. I think that the only one that is shippable is GraphQL, but we need to talk about their future needs, especially for those subscriptions. And again, the controllers and the Grape API also have some drawbacks that need to be solved. Like there are some circle dependencies related to the URLs that are used on the Sidekick. So
okay,
there are still some answers that needs, like it's not 100% shippable without further discussion.
Gotcha.
Yes, the GraphQL is really like the closest to ship out of the stuff that we did, because it's also green on the CI. So the GraphQL was like our primary pick because it has the least amount of the cross dependencies to the rest of the code base.
Okay. So we'd want to document the implementation if it's already there, share the proposal with the GraphQL team or teams to gather feedback to make sure we haven't missed anything, and then update the epic with the next implementation steps. And which epic would we use? This is kind of a generic parent one, but are we going to break it down by areas? So like have a GraphQL one, a Grape one, what makes sense
Yeah.
here.
That
But
makes
Bobby-
intuitive sense to me, but we can maybe like cross that bridge when we have to. How to split it out specifically, but yeah, that's exciting. I think that's a really good outcome already.
Okay. So Nicola, you clear on what you need to do next?
Well, not exactly, because we need to update the blueprint, and I know I will sync with Camille about that, but I'm still not sure, like, should I pick next something from the database rapid action or continue working on this, or we can do it in parallel. I'm not 100% sure. Like,
honestly, there's still some discussions going on, so I would continue down this path for now. There's still some debate on whether we should pick specific endpoints from the rapid action or we should focus on moving all the sidekick jobs to replicas. So while you have momentum in this, I would focus on this.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and Nicola, if you want some help or like a sync session to like talk about this and how to structure it, feel free to reach out and we can schedule something, and then happy to help with that as well.
You guys have office hours tomorrow, right? That might be a good place to talk about it if you have any questions.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right, back to the board. Matthias, you're up.
Yeah, so the GC story, that was the one where we kind of reduced the scope to just changing the initial heap size. I'm working with John Jarvis like every day basically to roll this out slowly. So we're still like trying to figure out the specific final rollout plan, but like the first few steps we agreed on, so those are already in progress. So today we merged a change that we'll put it on staging. There's 2 open MRs as well. We're not merging them right now because that would enable it for everyone. So we first want to like slowly roll it out on SaaS and see how it works. So that's kind of like, you know, a little bit every day, I guess. So we'll probably drag on for another week or so. Yeah, but it is on staging. It will be on Canary soon. And then next, we're going to do it probably by workload. So we're probably going to put it on one Kubernetes cluster in the Git and WebSockets fleets. And if that works out, deploy it across those entirely. And then we will start slowly putting it on web and API as well. That's different kind of work because they're still running on VMs, not on Kubernetes. So that makes it more complicated. But yeah, we'll figure that out. So it's still ongoing. And the next one, what was the last date? So it looked promising. This has been running on one cluster on the WebSockets fleet. John said he wanted to look into roll this out more widely, but I might have to ping him again on this, so I'm not really sure what the state is there. It's not fully rolled out yet.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the SQL N+1 pipelines controller?
Yeah, so I think I was able to fix one N+1. I'm not totally sure how best to verify that this was effective. It is on Canary, and I looked at a dashboard that I thought would show the impact, and I don't see any impact. So I'm not sure how impactful this actually was. It's just really hard to say because I don't have access to the initial request that like caused this to really kind of get out of hand. I know that Camille is also looking, so we ended up splitting this up into 2 separate fixes. So I know Camille is also looking at a different aspect of this, which had to do with the number of environments a build can run against. So maybe that will be more impactful. It's just super hard to say by running a unit test or something to know which one was actually the big factor in production that, yeah, kind of escalated this. So I don't know, Camille, if you had anything to add, because I'm not looking at it anymore right now.
I'm not looking at this anymore as well, this environment one. I just started focusing on some other stuff.
Yeah, I also like,
around queuing.
I'm also not sure if it's worth it because like a few of these issues that we have, we really need to be careful with how we phrase the issues because they seem to suggest that the database is the problem. And I'm not convinced it is. Like this was one example, and the same controller, the show endpoint is another example where yes, it's slow, but it's not slow because it spends so much time in the database. It actually spends 95% of the time on CPU. Not in the database. So either for some reason it's super expensive, whatever active record is doing. So that I guess is kind of then related to the database, or it's something else. Like it could be JSON rendering, for instance, because we know that has been a problem in the past. And then I kind of got like a little confused as to what are we trying to solve with this rapid action, because it was all kind of phrased around database pressure. And because I just can't verify that this is a problem in terms of database pressure from where I am. So I kind of started to look at things that are more obviously database related issues, like where we actually spend a lot of time running queries. Yeah. So
there's a couple aspects on database pressure. Along with like the amount of data that's being pulled back, it's the frequency too, just the sheer volume of calls, whether the single call is heavy or not. We're just seeing far too many calls right now. And maybe this is one of those where they just wanted to reduce the number of calls. But I agree with your previous statement that the rapid action is probably not correctly labeled in that it's focusing, and the title implies that it's focusing entirely on the database, where it could be just the volume of calls needs to be reduced. And that's something, next time we meet for the rapid action, I will ask for a retitle on that because it is misleading.
Yeah, I wonder if we're actually all on the same page about this, because like the way Andrew phrased it, we are focused on the database related things and very specifically on moving traffic away from the primary nodes.
Yeah.
And I have like a super hard time even assessing like what traffic goes through the primaries. So it's a bit tricky right now to prioritize the work that's there, or like pick out these individual workers or endpoints to focus on.
I mean, it's even more tricky because we appear to have even more reasons for this rapid action. And like Craig mentioned that it's not only database, and it's like maybe way beyond database. And I actually stumbled across Andrew's suggestion today. It's like we should focus only on the queries hitting primary, because this is our like the biggest issue, that we have very limited capacity. Yeah. So I guess we are very misaligned on what we should be doing on this rapid action, and like it's not clear, like because everyone has slightly different perspective. It's like we just have a lot of small problems that kind of make everything to point down at some point.
There were a couple of very painful spikes that I think have been since mitigated that precipitated this rapid action. So the number of runners, and then there was an N+1 that Heinrich has already fixed that I think was kind of, it may have been a symptom, but not the cause of some of the pressure that they saw that got us to that rapid action. From the last meeting, we had a very similar discussion about the point and the focus of the rapid action. And the feedback was, let's get Andrew's feedback and infrastructure's feedback on what problem we need to solve immediately. And Andrew is coming back with the Sidekick work. So, and the Sidekick work that he is suggesting actually plays into a lot of what we're seeing on the database side as far as reducing the pressure on the primary. So I agree with Andrew's assessment that that's probably the most important thing we can do right now. And there are probably some spot fixes that, can't even remember which team we got pulled into for this, the runner team or verify group that we're helping out for this rapid action. So as I said to Nicola, in absence of anything that is clearly on fire that makes sense for us to fix right now, continue on with whatever momentum you're working on, and hopefully we will have better clarity tomorrow for the rapid action when we sync up again and we have very specific feedback from Andrew and infrastructure of these are the problems that development needs to solve to reduce the pressure, and we don't have another outage like we had a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago with the same root cause. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I no, it totally does, and I think it sounds like anything that we see where Sidekick is involved is a pretty safe bet, I think, to look into optimizations there. Camille posted a couple really interesting like charts or distributions or breakdowns, I guess, of like how much time particular workers spend in the database and so forth. And there were definitely a couple that looked pretty off. So I just I don't think this is totally up to date. Could you actually refresh this board? Because I had unassigned myself from this last issue there, and because I picked up a different one related to Sidekick. Oh, why is it not? Oh, weird. Okay, well, I thought I had unassigned myself, but like that last one is the one I ended up picking because it doesn't run super frequently, the store security reports worker, but when it runs, it is quite impactful. So there were a couple instances where it ran like it spent 3 minutes in the database, stuff like that. It's quite inefficient. It's a bit difficult to dive into the security code stuff. It's fairly complex. But yeah, it looks like it's related to fetching a lot of items from the database, and then it does like kind of a service execution for each of those, and then that execution does a ton of other things again. So you have this kind of explosive growth.
Okay, we'll wait for Andrew's feedback on this one. I see that you asked him for some data about a little while ago, and he's just gotten back today, so he's probably still catching up with his backlog of requests. So I'll wait for feedback on that. There are 3 unassigned items in this column, and Fabian, correct me if I'm wrong, but with this workflow that we're using, probably shouldn't be in dev if it's unassigned.
Not necessarily. They should, if somebody is actively working on them, they should assign themselves to them. So if not, then probably a different state is more applicable.
No. So Camille, I know you created these 2. Are you working on them, or have you?
I'm actually working on the first one, and I'm uncovering a very simple optimization to archive trace worker. It's part of that. So yes, I'm actually like working on that. I'm almost done, and I will send these to review. It's very simple docs, like showing the difference between these counters. Right. On example that actually I posted in the backend channel during our call right now, because it was super interesting. The difference between append to a string with 2 ways of doing that. And we usually do this less efficient one. Not usually, we always use this less efficient one.
Of course. All right, what about the second one?
I did not yet start working on this, but okay. I think like when I finish the first one, I will just push a few graphs to that one, and then maybe Craig or you, Fabian, could figure out how we could use these graphs to raise awareness of the memory usage. Because like I think at that point when I post these things to the graphs, my job there would be basically kind of done. Then it's more like irradiating this knowledge and figuring out how we could engage other teams.
Yeah, I think we may actually want that in the enablement performance indicators or in Sisense somewhere as a supporting. This is how much everybody uses. I think that would be quite interesting. So yeah, ping me on that one. I'm still fascinated. I think I'm the only Fabian in GitLab still. And that seems unlikely given that it's not such a uncommon name.
Isn't there another one? I thought last name starts with a P, right?
Oh God,
don't you are the only one.
Illusion.
No, it's Fabio. Sorry, you're the only one. There are far too many Craigs here, by the way. I'm not used to that. I'm usually the only one. All right, and then we have one last one here. Optimized database call count.
I should have probably not added active there. It's like, because I spent most of the day just looking into a few things, trying to identify which ones would be impactful to work on. But and then this one, I came to the same conclusion as with the index one, that it's actually not the database. It doesn't look like the database is the big problem here, but rather that we spent so many CPU cycles on something, and then because I wasn't sure if that is really relevant to the rapid action, I then moved on. So maybe you can just drop the active label, or I can do it. It probably should be on the board here.
Let's put it in validation for now.
Yeah. Oh, and could you also remove the in depth? I'm sorry, I forgot to unlabel all that stuff. Yeah, thanks.
Done. Thanks. All right, there were a couple of topics that were not on the board.
Actually, I moved it on our board just during our meeting. I applied both labels to both merge request and issue because it makes more sense since we are working on it and will count towards our team. So it's in maintainer review currently. Okay. I'm not actively working on it right now.
Oh, you're not?
I mean, I just sent it to maintainer review. So I applied. Memory active. Okay, yeah, forgot that.
All right.
Just before we move off the board, I think there was a little bit of discussion on the documentation for our memory constrained environment thing.
Yeah, I actually have that.
I'd really love for us to, get a draft of that out relatively soon so we can finish this. I'm happy to help with it. If there is confusion on how to do it, maybe we can do that tomorrow morning in the office hour.
Yeah, I will be happy to discuss it because I have a bit of confusion on that. If you want to go 2, 3, 4 road, which is tricky, and in my opinion, it's not achievable that fast. Or if you just go with general recommendations, which is much more easier to ship as a first iteration.
I'm much more in favor of something easy and shippable rather than something maybe better but not shippable.
Yeah, if we could just go over some of the basics, then we can do it tomorrow. Because I think the main thing I was confused by was what the whole format of this is supposed to be. Are we looking to inject small nuggets of information around where to bring memory down in different areas of the product, or do we want to have some kind of comprehensive single guide, which might be its own self-contained page of here are the 10 different things or whatever you can do to bring memory use down? Or I'm kind of missing the basic kind of vision behind what this documentation is supposed to do. So that would help.
Let's maybe connect tomorrow morning and just either knock it out in collaboration, at least the first draft, and then get it reviewed by Camille or someone.
Sure. Yeah. Cool.
Right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
This one is not going to be on our board since it's in the infrastructure project.
Yeah, that's just the that's this change management issue I created now because we said we wanted to get into the habit of doing this for it's just this one environment variable that we set, but it's kind of good to have this issue to talk about how do we want to roll this out. But we talked about it earlier. It's the same. It's just the change management issue for the actual issue.
No, we already covered this one. All right. We can skip the rest for now in the interest of time. Fabian, you added a couple at the bottom here.
Yes. So the first one, maybe you can highlight. So I created a draft memory direction page. The MR has been sitting around for a while. I got some feedback, but I think it's essentially good enough to merge as is. You know, we don't have anything after, you know, we merge this, we have something, and I create a follow-up for some discussions. But if there is no objection, I would just go ahead and merge it, or maybe Craig can merge it now, actually.
Yes, go. It's good. It's good. Thank you for doing this. Thank you.
There we go.
It's on the train.
And then this is kind of related to the rapid action. It's mainly something that I think you can read if you have some time, right? I think Craig is in there as well. I'm in there. So there is a notion that the planning that teams are doing across the organization does not factor in infrastructure, like infra dev issues or security enough. And so the question is, how are we going to change that? But also a little bit, why is this happening now, right? And there's some discussion around that. I think the three main things that sort of surfaced, I think there's potentially a sort of lack of understanding why these things are important, right? And so maybe not everybody is aware why they should actually do something, right? Then I think there is a potential for a sort of negatively compounding technical debt, right? Over time, you know, if you always like iterate, you ship new stuff, but now you have a lot of stuff, right? And I think we deal with that quite a bit. It becomes more difficult, right? And then rapid action is maybe the kind of result where things start to hit, you know, a wall, and it's harder and harder to do something about it, right? And I think the last thing is, I think from the product side, the question is like, how do we actually prioritize work that actively addresses technical debt, right? Why, how should that happen? Why should it happen, right? And my personal opinion on this is, and that's really just my personal opinion, I think like addressing infra dev issues or technical debt essentially is the same process as any other feature, right? You should break it down, you should understand what you're trying to do, right? You should make minimal changes, and it should be planned just in the same way. But if you don't do that, then it will always fall behind, right? And it's not going to be a priority, and then, you know, you end up with an issue there. So it's worth reading. Go check it out. I think ultimately, unless product and engineering are aligned with regards to this, it's not actually going to go anywhere, right? Because your product manager is going to tell you, ship these new things or do this or do that. And then, you know, like that's going to be the priority. That's fine. But, you know, at some point things will become bad. And I think in some areas it's worse than in others. That's also kind of where things are.
Yeah, to that point, I think we are less impacted by this because we are mostly focused on infrastructure and tech debt and back-end work anyway, where we have less feature-driven initiatives. So this may not hit home as much for this team, but maybe there's some good ideas coming from this team. If you have any feedback, read through the thread if you have time. And that is the end of the agenda. We are about at time anyway. Any other topics anybody wants to cover or share today? Nope, we'll take that as a no. All right. Happy Monday. It's good seeing everybody. See you all online.
Monday.
Yeah. Happy
See you.